and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Angela Harders, and she is going to talk to us about why she decided to quit teaching in the public school system in order to pioneer a new self-directed learning program called the PAX Academy. She is also a best-selling author of a book called Tales of a Toxic Teacher, and I cannot wait to hear her whole story. So we'll just dive right in, Angela. I would love to know what made you want to be a teacher originally.
I have wanted to be a teacher ever since I was a little kid. I was the girl who was playing teacher with my dolls and my Barbies growing up, but I truly believed that by being a teacher, that would be an incredible way for me to be able to make a difference in the lives of children. I wanted to be that person who could be a positive difference for them, that could love them and inspire them and really help them to achieve all their dreams.
Awesome. That sounds like most of us. We have had a great school experience ourselves, and we want to recreate that for kids. And then sometimes things go awry. What were some of the things that really shocked you when you first got in the classroom?
Oh my goodness. From the first 5 minutes of my first year teaching, I knew within 5 minutes that there were major problems. I was placed to teach. I was selected to be a teacher through a program that's similar to Teach for America. And so part of the contract is that they place us in the schools that have the highest needs, and also places where a lot of the other teachers don't really want to teach. And so my first year teaching, I was placed as a Spanish 1 teacher at a high school that was pretty rough. And I was placed in a room that had 30 desks in it. My smallest class size was 35 students, and my largest class size had 42. And so when the bell rang for that first day, was looking at my roster. I had 42 students on my list, realizing, oh my goodness, there's not enough space for everyone to sit down. And there was a student who came in. He was really, really tall. I think he was on the basketball team or something, but he was super tall. And he came in, he sat down in one of the chairs and immediately hung his foot over the chair that was in front of his and just pulled out his phone and started texting away. And of course, realizing that there wasn't enough space for everyone, I went over to him and just very politely said, "Excuse me, would you mind taking your feet down so someone else could sit here?" And he looked up at me, stood up, and immediately started putting his finger in my face and said, "I don't know who the H you think you are." B started cursing at me. "You can't tell me what to do," blah, blah, blah. And I was shaking. I was fresh out of college, 20 years old, brand new to all of this. And I just looked at him and said, I'm your teacher. And he just said, "You can't tell me what to do, B." And he picked up the desk, threw it at me. And I moved out of the way, and then he walked out of my classroom, and I never saw him again until graduation day, when I watched him walk across the stage and they handed this boy a diploma. And I knew he needed my class in order to graduate. And I said, how on earth is this boy crossing the stage and getting a diploma when he was in my class not even 5 minutes, screamed at me, cursed me out, threw a desk at me, and left. And I made a comment to the teacher that was sitting next to me at graduation. I said, how is this possible? What is he doing? How did he graduate? He never came to my class. And she just said, "Don't ask questions. It's better for him to be graduated and be society's problem than for us to fail him and to have him be our problem for another year." That was her answer.
That's crazy. Wow. And I thought I had some crazy experiences, but that is really intense. And did you continue to see that level of aggression and defiance and just attitudes throughout your teaching experiences?
I did. Obviously not from all of the students. There were very few students that genuinely wanted to pay attention and tried to, get good grades and tried to do the work. But the overwhelming majority of students, I would say, the behavior was just out of control.
Wow. And did you also encounter other teachers experiencing violence or threats, or did you ever feel threatened outside of that time?
Absolutely. During my first year teaching as well, the reason why there was an open position for a Spanish teacher was because the Spanish teacher before me, she had been so terribly bullied by her students that she quit right before the school year started. And yeah, her students would, while she was teaching, they would take a bucket, like a big trash can full of water, and dump it on her while she was teaching in the front of the classroom. She had slipped and fallen, and it was just not a good experience. And then there was another time during my first year teaching when there was another teacher that was across the hall from me. And you know how we have our kind of like assigned duties. Her duty was to make sure that the students didn't leave the building through the side doors in the middle of the day. And so she was doing that, and she had kind of stretched her arm out to block a young lady who was trying to leave the building during school hours. And she put her hand out and said, you need to go back to class. You're not allowed to leave the building during the school day. And this girl punched her in the face and just started beating the tar out of this little Filipino teacher lady. And I mean, she was kicking her and punching her. It was terrible. And all the students started running out of the classrooms. No one's helping. They're just recording on their phones, and it was terrible. I mean, she had like broken ribs, she had a cracked skull, and nothing happened to the girl who attacked her. I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible. But yes, violence happened in that building every single day between students and staff, between staff and students. I mean, it was terrible.
That sounds like a nightmare. And I'm just curious, when the school knows that there's these kind of problems, what kind of messaging are they giving to teachers? What kind of like professional development and trainings are you getting? What was that like from the administrative and instructional coach angle?
I had a fight break out in my classroom once. And the message that we got is that anytime that there were students that were in conflict, we were told as teachers not to intervene. They said that our job is to just hit the button, call for security, wait for them to show up, but we were not supposed to, physically try to stop or separate the students. And there was an incident in my classroom. I was in the middle of teaching, and one girl stood up on one side of the classroom and walked over to the other side of the classroom and ripped this girl's braids out of her head and was beating her with her own braids. I mean, her braids were bloody, and she was just whipping her with her own braids. So I called for security. I'm like, I don't even know what happened. I mean, we're just talking about verb conjugations here, and she just got up and was whipping her, and security never showed up. They never showed up. And so finally there was a male teacher who was actually in the military to the left of my classroom. And I just ran over and called him and said, please help. Like they never came. Security never came. And so he came, and like some of the students were trying to separate them as well and kind of get them separated from each other. And I finally asked the girl, I said, what happened why did you just attack her like that? And she was like, oh, she looked at me wrong. And I'm like, we can't just attack people for looking at you a certain way, but it just, yeah, those kinds of things. So they would basically tell us that not to physically intervene and to call security and wait for them to show up. And oftentimes they would not come because they're dealing with other crises throughout the building.
Wow, that is so insane. And I'm just kind of curious, did you guys have a building-wide discipline program like PBIS, or what kind of steps did they tell you guys to follow?
Yes, we did have PBIS. They would tell us to, even though it was high school, we were supposed to write their names on the board and then give them the 3 check marks. And then if that didn't work, then once they got to 3 checks, we were supposed to call home. And then after we call home, if that didn't work, they were supposed to write them referrals. And the most I would see a student get would be in school suspension. But even that was a complete joke. I mean, they were excited to go to in-school suspension because they could hang out with their friends and not do any work all day. So it was like a free vacation for them, basically. Very rarely would a student actually get suspended or expelled. And the reason for that is that the schools get graded based on the amount of suspensions and expulsions that they have. And so admin is very decentivized to actually implement discipline measures in that way.
Wow. And I'm just imagining in an environment like that, it's almost like you're either putting out fires, or your nervous system is probably on high alert every second of the day, just thinking, is something going to break out when I turn around? Like, what's going to happen? So what was it like to try to actually teach and get academic content across in that environment? And I'm curious, did the kids do their work? Were they listening? What was that like?
It was very difficult. I think classroom management was definitely the most difficult thing for me in my first year teaching. I didn't anticipate that so much of my time would be spent dealing with student behaviors. Like, I just assumed that students would be like me. They would go to class and they would want to listen and do their work and follow instructions and learn something new, and we'd have fun together, and it would be this great, happy, positive experience. And the reality of teaching was not that. And so it was very difficult for me. And I found myself becoming the kind of person that I never imagined that I could be, that I never wanted to be. I remember the day that the Filipino teacher was completely, beat up by this girl. when the students came back into my classroom, they just would not settle down. I mean, the energy was through the roof and they were all talking amongst each other, which I totally understand. But I literally just stood there at the front of the classroom waiting for them to sit down and be quiet so we could continue with our lesson and move on. And they wouldn't. And I stood there, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm just standing there and they could care less that I was standing there. And then finally, after like 15 minutes, I screamed at them and I said, I'm tired of you guys treating teachers like S. And that was the first time in my life I had ever said a curse word out loud. I grew up in a Christian home and we did not use that kind of language at all. And I screamed at them. I said, I'm tired of you guys treating teachers like S. I work so hard to plan fun and engaging lessons for you guys. And if you could care less, then why should I care? If you don't care about learning this, then why should I care about teaching this? And I said, I'm done for the day. And I mean, they all turned around and looked at me then because I was losing my mind with them. I was so mad. And I just said, I'm done. I don't care what you do for the rest of class. I'm going to sit at my desk and I'm done for the day. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to sit down and I'm done. And I did. I sat down at my desk and most of them at that point, they kind of started sitting down and doing, some of them were trying to do their work but they were quiet for the rest of that class period. But inside I felt terrible. I said, what kind of a human being am I that I'm screaming and cursing at a teenager? Like that's totally not the kind of person that I want to be. It's not the kind of human being that I stand for. And I'm turning into this person. I'm turning into a toxic teacher myself. By being in this toxic environment, it's making me become a toxic teacher. And I didn't like the person who I was becoming. And so the next day I actually apologized to my students. I mean, I was in tears. I felt so bad. And their response shocked me even more. When I apologized to them, I said, I'm so sorry for screaming at you, for cursing at you. No one deserves to be talked to in that way. That was so wrong of me to speak to you that way. And the overwhelming response to them was they just said, Miss Harders, it's okay. We hear that every day. We hear that every day, both in school and at home. It's not a big deal. It's okay. We're used to it. And it just broke my heart. I'm like, what is this generation that is grown so accustomed to adults screaming and cursing at them that they don't think it's a big deal? Like that's just normal for them. And it's like, no wonder they treat each other that way because that's what they're used to at school and at home their whole life. And it broke my heart. But I was like, I can't do this. I don't want to be that kind of teacher.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability. And I think so many of us can relate to you because I think a lot of the people that are drawn to teaching are empathetic, they're kind, they're servant-hearted, they want to give, they're not looking for loads of money or acclaim. They literally get into the job to love and help kids. And it is so true. This job can kind of make you crazy. You reminded me of a situation where thankfully it was a small group of kids, maybe like 5 or 6 in for recess detention. But this one kid, he somehow pushed me to the edge. And I remember I had a clipboard in my hand and I threw it on the ground and I said, yeah, out of my classroom, no. And like literally teachers were opening their doors and looking and I was just like shaking from head to toe. And I just thought, this is not who I am. Right. And it's just so wild what teaching can do to you. And it is so true. It's this kind of toxic cycle that can happen where kids are almost trained to ignore a nice teacher, to ignore a gentle voice, to ignore, human kindness. And they almost don't listen until teachers raise their voice and act like a drill sergeant. And it was just so difficult for me because that is not in my personality at all. But I kind of felt like I cannot be who I am and be in this job because what it takes these days to do this job is a literal drill sergeant. So I just wanted to pause and thank you for being so honest about that. And I'm kind of curious too, were kids passing your classes? Were you kind of forced to give them all A's? Like, how did the grading system work?
Oh my goodness. The grading system is a complete joke. It's a complete joke. I was told that I had to have a certain percentage of my students that were passing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be hired again. And I just remember saying, like, I can't make up grades for them. I mean, this is Spanish. Either they put in the work to learn it or they don't. Like they're not going to learn Spanish through osmosis. And if they don't learn Spanish, then I'm not doing them any favors by passing them on to Spanish 2, which is much harder than Spanish 1. And so I didn't. I never like lied about my grades, but my admin was very mad at me that I reported their grades honestly. And I think that's why they did what they did, because when that boy walked across the stage that never attended my class, I was like, wait a second, how did that happen? And I came back from the graduation and I went straight to my classroom. I pulled out, we have to print out all of our records of like the grades that we submitted online. I pulled out all of my records, and sure enough, he had straight E's. But then when I went in, I looked up his grades in the computer. Someone had changed all of his grades from zeros to 60%. I don't know who. But I know that they were doing those kinds of things. I know that they were lying about their grades. And then when I was working in a different county, they had the 50% rule. Did your county have that?
I've had schools like that. Mm-hmm. You want to tell the audience what that is?
Yes, yeah. So the 50% rule basically is that if a student writes their name on a piece of paper, the lowest grade that they can get is a 50%. So even if they were to get every single question wrong, the lowest grade that they could get is a 50%. And then the rule that they had the rule for tests and quizzes was 50%. That was the lowest that they could get. And then the rule that they had for like homework and classwork was completion only. So if they tried, they would get 100% just for trying. Again, even if they got every single question wrong. So in theory, you could have a student who writes their name on every test and quiz, gets every single question wrong, and gets a 50% for tests and quizzes. And then they get, they do all of their homework, again, get every single question wrong, but they get 100% for completion. And then they pass the class with a D, literally with knowing nothing. And so seeing that was just, it's like you just begin to see behind the veil, and you see the sham and the scam that grades are today.
Definitely. And did you kind of notice in this environment that the kids that were, for lack of a better term, the good kids, the good students, did they kind of get demoralized just seeing so much chaos and seeing that their work seemed to not matter?
Definitely. I would have students cry sometimes in class that they would be so frustrated that they couldn't hear me because the rest of their classmates would be talking or disrespectful or interrupting. And it was very frustrating for them. And it was frustrating that like we couldn't move forward because there were so many disruptions all the time that we were just wasting so much time together. And it was very frustrating for the students that were actually trying, that were wanting to learn. I mean, it was just crazy to me. I'm like, I have, 42 students in the same classroom, and I have one student that has like 130% because they did a million extra credit, because that's what admin was like, you got to give them all this extra credit so they could restore themselves. And then in that same class, I've got another kid with a 6%. I'm like, how is that possible? And it was very frustrating. And at the end of the day, regardless, if they did a good job, it was the students' work that they did a good job. But if they did a bad job, then that was my fault. What did I not do to build a relationship? What did I not do to call their parents every day that they didn't turn in their homework? I'm like, I've got 240 students on my class list. There's no way I can call home for all of them. I mean, it's just, as much as I wish I could, there's no way,
Absolutely. And I'm kind of curious, what are the results of this happening from elementary school all the way through high school? Did you start to see kids coming in that could hardly read, could hardly write, couldn't comprehend? What was that like?
Yes, when I was teaching at the high school, I had students that were graduating seniors that were reading on a kindergarten or first grade reading level. I had students that could not write a complete sentence. I would have high school seniors that were still writing with a lowercase I on their, when they would say I, whatever, they would write with a lowercase I. I mean, just very basic elementary school level reading, writing, math. They could not add, they could not multiply. The comprehension was non-existent in English, much less in Spanish. I mean, it was shocking. It was shocking to me.
Wow. And I'm just curious, what did all of these awful experiences do to your own morale, your own physical and emotional health? Did it start to take its toll on you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No one can remain in a toxic environment and not remain affected by that. I mean, being in a toxic environment for so long, it has an impact on you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Every aspect of my life was impacted in a negative way from constantly living under this stress and overwhelm that was just expected as a part of the job as a teacher. And I actually started manifesting physical problems, that I started having panic attacks. I didn't know that they were panic attacks. I thought I was having a heart attack and dying. And actually, I was at school one day when I had a panic attack, and I called my admin. I said, "Please call an ambulance. I think I'm having a heart attack." And so they had an ambulance come to this to the middle school. At that time I was teaching middle school, come to the middle school and pick me up. And they took me to the hospital. And when the doctor saw me, he said, "Oh, you're a teacher." And I said, "Yes." And he was like, "Oh, that explains it. We see so many teachers coming in here with complaining of heart problems. And, but, it's just the stress and anxiety from the job." And he said, "We see a lot of teachers in here." And he just kind of brushed it off like, "Oh yeah, that's just kind of a part of a part of teaching, is that you just have heart problems and you have, panic attacks, and that's just normal." And I was like, "Well, this is not normal." Yeah.
Definitely. And I'm kind of curious, did you feel gaslighted by admin, instructional coaches, or did they acknowledge, I know that this is a really difficult environment, but we're in this together? What was the vibe like with just the other adults in the building?
I absolutely felt gaslit by, and now I did have some admin that were wonderful. I had a few admin that were amazing and understanding and compassionate and so kind. But the majority of the admin that I worked with, especially my first couple of years teaching, they were just as toxic and terrible, as the environment that I was in, which probably made sense. That they're the leaders of the organization, and they really do set the tone for the culture of their building. And yeah, they would constantly, like I said, I mean, everything was my fault. They expected me to jump through all these hoops and do all these things and go above and beyond. I mean, I even had an admin once, when I was explaining to her, I'm like, "I don't have enough time in my day to do all of the work that you're asking me to do. It is physically impossible. I'm literally spending every waking moment of my life thinking about teaching and trying to do lesson plans and contacting parents and looking for new strategies." And like, I mean, it was consuming my entire life, both in school and out of school. On the weekends, I mean, my friends would come over and help me grade papers on the weekends because I just couldn't do it all. And when I would tell that to them, their response was, "Oh, you just need to pick one day a week and stay until 10 p.m." And I was
Wow.
like, in what world, in what other job would your boss tell you to stay a full 8-hour day after you're supposed to leave, unpaid, so that you can get done the work that you're supposed to do during your actual paid working hours? But that was their solution.
That's intense. And I'm wondering, did you see some shocking things when you worked at the elementary level? Was it any easier than high school? How did that work?
I did. I mean, there were things that I loved about every grade that I taught. At this point, I have taught everything from kindergarten through 12th grade. The elementary school ages were definitely a lot easier in the sense that they were still excited and passionate about learning for the most part. They come to school and they're excited and happy to see you, and they run up to you and give you a big hug, and they tell you how much they love you. And, it's just, that aspect of teaching at the elementary school level was definitely a lot easier. But there were things that I saw even at the elementary school that I was like, "What is happening?" I mean, we had kids that were in elementary school that were doing drug deals during recess. Like, there would be gang members that would come up to the fence and they would do drug deals with the elementary school kids. And the elementary school kids would, distribute drugs to elementary school kids. I mean, it just it was just crazy. And but that same pattern of like constantly feeling overwhelmed, constantly feeling like everything is your fault, that you're expected to be all things for all people all the time, go above and beyond, sacrifice yourself for the good of the kids. That messaging was consistent no matter what age, grade, school, socioeconomic level I was working with. That was the same.
Wow. And what have you noticed in regards to parents? Are you seeing negative trends? Were they supportive? How did that work?
Parents were varied. Yeah, I would see some parents that were super involved and supportive, that really wanted to help their children succeed. And then I would have the flip side of parents that I would call them a million times and they would never answer, never respond to texts, emails, phone calls, nothing. Or they would, show up to teacher parent meetings high or drunk and yeah, crazy things. But then I would also have the flip side. When I was teaching at a middle school, I had parents who, that was a little bit better, like kind of socioeconomic area. But I had a parent who had scheduled a meeting with me, and they were like berating their child. They scheduled a meeting with me after school and for like an hour because their child didn't have a high enough A. She had a 92% in my class and they wanted her to have a 94 or higher. And what can she do to get a 94? And I'm like, this girl she's in 7th grade. She's taking Spanish 2, which is a sophomore level in high school class. And you're berating her because she doesn't have a high enough A for you. Like, so yeah, seeing the difference, is like you have the parents who didn't care at all, weren't present, weren't available. Then I also had a lot of, I speak Spanish. And so I had a lot of Hispanic parents too that really wanted to care, but they felt that language barrier too, I think was really difficult for them. They didn't know how to help their students with learning things at home just because they didn't know the language, and they felt really kind of isolated from the school community in a lot of ways. And then the overbearing parents that just expected so much. And then there were other parents who were amazing and supportive and their kids thrived. And yeah, so I got to see the whole gamut.
Definitely. And so you got to have some experience a little bit behind the scenes doing some administrative roles. What are some of the things that people are not aware that's happening in schools, maybe corruption or just shady things you saw kind of being behind the scenes?
Oh my goodness. Nepotism is one. We have policies in schools that you're not allowed to supervise family members. You're not allowed to evaluate spouses or, family. Those kinds of things were happening a lot, where a supervisor would be married to the person that they were supposed to be evaluating. So of course they got great evaluations all the time. And yeah, admin a lot of times would intentionally hide things from teachers for their benefit. That was another thing I saw a lot when I did payroll. They did not tell the teachers in our building that they have a contractual right to be paid every time they cover someone else's classroom. I had no idea when I was a teacher. I was just told, if we can't find a substitute, it's your job to kind of help out, and it's your planning period, so you got to go cover this person's classroom because we all got to be a team player. And I had no idea that I was supposed to be paid for covering another teacher's classroom. So when I started doing payroll and I learned that, I started telling the other teachers in my building, and my admin was really upset with me. They were really mad that I was, telling the other teachers, hey, if you cover another person's classroom, you got to fill out this form and give it to me and you'll be paid. And so they didn't like that very much. And so then they transferred me from doing payroll to being the school financial specialist. And then when I was doing that, I was able to see, the budget. I was able to learn the way that schools spend their money. I think if people knew the way that schools are administering their money, they would absolutely revolt. The way that schools get their money is the government basically has a budget, and if every school is allocated a certain amount of the budget, like both federal allocations as well as state and local allocations, and if they don't use their budget within that school year, the government basically says, okay, we've given you, I don't know, $10 million or whatever, let's say $10 million. You haven't used the $10 million this year. So since you've only used $6 million this year, we're only going to give you $6 million for next year because that's all you used. And so there's this incentive to not be financially responsible with our money, because they're like, well, if we don't use it, we're going to lose it for next year. And I'm like, but if we didn't use it, then we should lose it. We don't need it, teachers that would buy supplies for themselves when there's literally warehouses full of books and paper and pencils and posters and scissors and paper, like so much stuff. And I mean, it would make me sick every time I would see teachers that were spending thousands of their own dollars to do all these fancy things and make their classrooms look so beautiful. And I'm like, guys, your school has a budget for that. Like, you have to go talk to your school financial specialist and tell them, like, hey, I want to buy this and this and this for my classroom. And they will buy it for you. They're required to buy those things for you because there's a budget allocated for that. But so many teachers had no idea. And of course, admin's not going to tell them. When we got to the end of our year and they had to burn through all the money, they went and bought all of the admin, those standing desks that like they go up and down, they spent thousands of dollars on pizzas at the end of the school year, just like trying to use up all the money the best that they could, and bought like 50 Costco sheet cakes. I mean, just like crazy stuff, trying to just burn through all the money as fast as they could. Lots of gifts for admin at the end of the year. But yeah, teachers didn't see that money.
That That is wild. And I kind of know what you're talking about because I worked as a student for a university as a resident assistant. And I actually remember that conversation with the director of housing. She was saying, oh, we have all of this extra money. So we went downtown in Austin and had dinners and all of this stuff. Because she said the exact same thing, like, we've got to use this money or they're not going to give it to us next year. So that is such a wild thing that's so widespread, even in public school. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. And so I'm kind of wondering, you're painting a very realistic picture of education. And I think it's something that so many people feel that they don't know how to verbalize. And I'm just curious, in the building with other teachers, would you guys talk about this and support each other? Or did people have an attitude that if I don't say it out loud, it doesn't exist and they're just kind of living in unicorn land?
Oh no, they would talk about it. I think I would say one of the most toxic places to be in a school is in the teacher's lounge. The students, the teachers would just speak very openly and honestly, and sometimes they would say really terrible things. Sometimes it was very honest things that needed to be said out loud. But a lot of times they would say things that I was like, man, just the cynicism and the frustration and just kind of voicing that whole like kind of quiet quitting thing a lot of times, or speaking so terribly about the students that of course we're supposed to be, working with. And but no, the teachers would definitely talk about how terrible things are. And I would ask them, hey, if you would you recommend teaching to someone else who's graduating from college? And every single person was like, no, not in a million years. Run. Don't do this.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you're doing a really good job of painting a picture of almost how teaching can make us sick. It can make us the worst versions of ourselves. And I definitely did find myself starting to feel really negative about everything and really starting to lose hope. And it's almost like, on the one hand, you cannot blame teachers for that, because when you're in an environment where you're being mistreated, where you're being forced to lie and like doctor scores to pass students that don't know anything, when you're seeing the impacts of teaching over years, manifest in students that can hardly read or write or reason, all of those things are so demoralizing. But why do you think it is that teachers stick in a career that has become so toxic and sick?
I think one of the reasons why teachers choose to stay, number one, I think for most of us, it's all we know, right? Like most teachers, we grew up going to school, so we've been within the school system for so long. We leave high school and then we go to college, and then we graduate from college, and then we just go back to school. So we don't really know the world outside of the classroom. And I think for a lot of teachers, we just kind of think that this is the way that things function. I think I actually quit teaching twice. I quit teaching the first time when my daughter had just turned 1. I was a single mom, and I just came to the realization that I cannot be the kind of teacher that I want to be and be the kind of mom that I want to be. And I have to choose. I don't have enough hours in my day to do both well. And so I chose my daughter, and I quit teaching, and I moved to Georgia and started working as a nanny for a family of 4. And that space for me of getting out of teaching, even though I was making significantly less money, but I was realizing how much happier I was, how much more at peace my daily life was, the opportunities for me to earn money on my own time frame and in my own way. That was really something that I had not really considered before. I was used to just kind of relying on that steady paycheck every year, and school was all that I knew before leaving at that point. And so when I actually returned to the world of education after that brief break, I was out for 2 years before going back. I feel like I was able to go back into it with new eyes. I wasn't the naive first year teacher that I was anymore. I had seen a little bit of the world. I had lived a little bit myself outside of the world of education. And I knew that I was not going to go back the same. And so that was what I did. I went back in knowing that I was probably not going to last very long in education, because it was like the blinders had been removed from my eyes. And around that same time, I actually was coming out of an abusive marriage. And a friend of mine had shared with me this, it's called the power and control wheel of abuse and domestic violence. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'll have to send you a picture. Yeah. So she shared this with me. to help me kind of start to see that, like, hey, the things that you're going through in your marriage, they're not like normal newlywed problems. They're more serious than just kind of like normal newlywed stuff. And she shared with me this power and control wheel of abuse. And she shared it with me with the intention of kind of helping me open my eyes and reflect on what was happening in my marriage. But as I was reading through all of those different aspects, the only thing that I could see was myself. And I was reading through all these different aspects, and I said, oh my gosh, this is literally what I have to do to children every single day. Force, coercion, threats, manipulation, isolation, humiliation, emotional abuse, gaslighting, like all of that was my job, my job as a teacher. And so at that point, I knew that I was not going to last long in education.
Absolutely. And I'm kind of curious, what other things do you think are wrong with our modern education system in public school?
There are a lot of things that we could be doing differently, that we could be doing better. I think when we understand the history of compulsory education and we understand the roots of the fact that schools were literally created to basically create lifelong worker bees that could sit down and shut up and work in the factories and just be the perpetual employee and follow along and not ask questions, not cause trouble, not think outside the box. And when we understand like that was the intention of the school system from the very beginning, then you really can start to kind of go back and say, okay, well, what would it look like? Like for me, I think the biggest question was, if I recognize that interacting with another human being through force and coercion and threats and manipulation, if I recognize that that causes harm, that this is an abusive way to interact with another human being, especially with a child, what would it look like then to not have that be a part of a child's education? What would it look like to educate a child without force, without trying to control them, without threatening them, without humiliating them, without isolating them, without gaslighting them, without emotionally abusing them? What would that look like without coercing them? And that was kind of how I stumbled into unschooling, which is what I do now.
That's really interesting. And I wonder if even the fact that, like you said, in your classes, sometimes you could have 30, sometimes you could have 42, maybe just by virtue of having so many people in one room with one agenda, it almost makes it impossible to individualize things. What do you think about that?
Of course. I mean, the whole model of schooling is standardization, right? They have to. There's no way that you can meet the individual needs of every individual because you've got 30 different people in the same room that all have 30 different needs, and they all have 30 different passions and 30 different interests and 30 different goals and 30 different skills and 30 different ways that they prefer to learn and 30 different times that they prefer to learn. And not everyone has to learn all the same things. And I think that's something that we forget in the world of education because everything is so standardized. It's just like we think that that's the way that education has to be, and it doesn't. And so when we can start to strip away our own schoolish mentality that learning has to look like this and it has to happen in this order and in this way and with this person and at this pace and in this place, when all of that is gone, then we can really create something that's going to be beautiful that will meet the needs of the individual. But until we can do that, I don't know. I don't know that schools will ever be a safe place for children or teachers because we're a part of that model that only can function through force and coercion.
I'm kind of wondering if there are similarities between unschooling and Montessori methods. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah. So both the unschooling and the Montessori methods are very child driven. They're both about really creating environments that are rich for children to be able to learn, but also giving them the freedom to pursue the things that they love in the way that they love. And so, yes, they're very, very similar. One of the biggest differences, though, is that Montessori is typically done within a classroom with, a guide, a teacher that's kind of functioning as a guide. And unschooling is typically done at home with the parents as the guide because there's no more of an individual education than me being able to work with my individual unique child in the way that meets their needs.
Interesting. And I'm kind of wondering, with our looming literacy crisis in America, how would you approach something as sometimes challenging as reading with a kid that's like, oh, I don't want to read, I'm bored with reading? How do you work that out if you in your mind as a mom or as an unschooling teacher knows, I know this kid needs to learn these vital skills that can be kind of boring and kind of repetitive versus wanting to tap into the kid's self-directed learning?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that is a great question. Actually, that was the question that inspired me to start unschooling because I was a reading teacher for a good portion of my career. And as a reading teacher, when I started talking and learning about the unschooling philosophy, I kept hearing all of these parents say that their children had learned to read as naturally as they learned to walk and talk. And when I kept hearing them say this, my initial thought was, that's impossible. There's no way. Like, kids can't just learn how to read on their own. Like, you have to teach them. That was my job. I was a reading teacher, and I was like, what do you mean my job was worthless? Like, how is that possible? And so around this time that I was first researching and trying to learn about unschooling, my daughter was 5. And so she didn't know how to read. And that was really the reason why we started unschooling. I was like, if ever I'm going to find out if it is possible that a child can learn how to read without being explicitly taught, now's the time, so I decided that I was going to give unschooling a try for 1 year. And very intentionally, I said, I'm not going to do anything that I would normally do as a reading teacher. I'm going to take off my teacher hat. And instead of viewing myself as the teacher of my child, I'm going to begin to view myself as the student of my child. I'm going to become the best student of my child that I can. I'm going to learn everything that I can about this unique individual that God has given me. And that was what I did for 1 year. I observed her. I took notes. I mean, I was like the scientist there, really studying, because I wanted to see, what does this natural process of reading look like? And Trish, by the end of the year, my mind was blown. I mean, I have no idea how my daughter learned how to read. I have no idea how she learned how to read. Yeah, by the end of that year of kindergarten, she was reading at a 3rd grade level. And I never taught her. Like, we never did a phonics lesson, never did a workbook, never did a worksheet, never used a curriculum, like nothing. And it was incredible to me. And one of the reasons why I chose to do that was because I had been a reading teacher and I saw the harm that came from trying to force children to read things that they didn't like or enjoy. It's like, there's no faster way to kill a love of reading than by trying to force a kid to read something that they don't like. I wouldn't like that as an adult. I wouldn't want someone to show up at my house and force me to read a book that I find to be boring. Why would we expect that a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old would be, or a 15-year-old would be any different? So that is my recommendation now for parents that are thinking about taking a more unschooling approach to literacy, is that we want to give our children as many positive experiences with reading as possible. We want to fill the home with positive experiences with reading. Like, we would live our life normally. Like, we would read books before we would go to bed, and we'd go visit the library, regularly. We would, have subtitles on the TV all the time. So we would play games that involved letters and things like that. But it was all very natural and organic. There was nothing forced or coerced about it. And it was all fun and positive. And my daughter she's going to be 11 at the end of this month. She loves reading and she loves writing. And she's actually published 4 books. And, just that she's done that without me ever like making her write anything, just because she enjoys that. And I think, how different would her relationship be to reading and writing if I had tried to force her and coerce her and threaten her, like, hey, you have to read for 30 minutes and write me a book report about this, this book. And it has to be this book because this is what the curriculum says. If I had that dynamic of force and coercion with her, I don't think that she would love reading and writing the way that she does now.
Wow, that's a really fascinating story. And I'm sure there's a lot of parents that are thinking, I would love to do this or incorporate these ideas into my life, but I just can't pull my kid out of school right now. Are there any tips or suggestions that you would have for them if they're in that space?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm a firm believer that anyone who wants to remove their children from school and educate them at home, especially with an unschooling philosophy, I think that is possible. Like, I think anyone can do it. I know for some people it might be more challenging than others. We might have to think outside the box a little bit, and we might have to rely on community. I mean, I'm a single mom myself, and so it's not easy by any means, but the sacrifices for me are definitely worth it. To be able to have quality and quantity time with my kids, which I love. But for parents who, for whatever reason, are not able to make that choice right now, I think being able to have honest conversations with your children about the environment that they're in is really important. If you do have the ability to have your children go to a more non-coercive model of education like Montessori, I think that would be ideal. I know Montessori for a lot of people is also, you know, it's a lot of them cost a lot of money. So Montessori is kind of a step in the right direction. Waldorf, I think, for a lot of people is a step in the right direction. Sudbury schools, which are more like democratic schools, those are also a step in the right direction, I think. But I would love to see every parent that wants to be able to be home with their children full time to be able to do that.
Wow, this has been a really fascinating and eye-opening conversation. And I definitely think it's challenging for many people that have only seen one modeling of school. And so I'm just curious, off the top of my head, do you think that there's any way to a little bit balance or combine a more traditional model of learning with some of the best dynamics of self-directed learning? Or do you think it really only works as a one or the other philosophy?
So for me, the issue really comes down to control, right? And so either like with a compulsory model, someone is is trying to have control and exert control over the individual child, whether that be the teacher or the curriculum, or there's something that is dictating and controlling what they learn, where they learn, how they learn, why they learn. Whereas with an unschooling or a self-directed model of education, the child is the one who's choosing. And sometimes children do choose school. So there are some unschoolers that I know that they actually do choose to go to school. But again, the dynamic is totally different. They're not there because they're forced and coerced to be there. They're there because they're choosing it. And the times that I've seen, they have chosen school because they're athletes and they wanted to play on the school sports team. That was the main reason. But for me, the two models are they don't fit. You know, either the child has freedom or he's forced. And yeah, so I think they're just two very different approaches to interacting with children. And do we trust them to be able to give them the respect and autonomy and the freedom and the support and the love and the patience and the care that they deserve? Or do we want to continue to operate through a model that is based on force and coercion and threats and manipulation and all those kinds of things? And yeah.
Well, this has been really fascinating. I always love to ask people, if you had a magic wand and you could change anything in education, what would it be?
Oh, if I had a magic wand, it would be that I would remove all aspects of abuse and force and coercion from the world of education. I think that would be the best way to help not only students but for teachers too, because us as teachers, we also feel that force and coercion. You know, that we're limited in what we're able to do. We don't have freedom to teach the way that we want to teach, or what we want to teach, or how we want to teach. Because we're limited by the things that force and control us. So I think the more that we can provide both teachers and students with freedom, I think that the better their education will be.
Wow. Well, you have definitely challenged my thinking, and I definitely want to do more research on unschooling because it's not something that I've ever looked into before. And I'm sure a lot of the audience members would also love to learn more. So I'm just curious, what are some of the ways that we can find you, whether it's your book, social media links, your school, anything that you want to tell us about?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually published a book on my experiences. It's called Tales of a Toxic Teacher, Exposing the Cycles of Abuse Within Our Schools. My book is available on Amazon. And I also started a private school for unschoolers called PAX Academy. So if you're curious and learning more about how to start unschooling, feel free to check out our website, paxacademy.org. I do free monthly Q&As where I just meet on Zoom and answer people's questions about unschooling and self-directed learning, because most people have never heard of this philosophy before and they don't know how it works, and it can sound intimidating. It definitely sounded intimidating to me the first time I heard about it. I was terrified at the thought that kids could learn with freedom and joy. But yeah, I think it's the best thing ever. And I tell people, I truly believe unschooling is the future of education. So I'm happy to talk about it with anyone. I also have Instagram and TikTok as well. So feel free to connect with me on any of those platforms. And I'll be sure to send you my links in case anyone would like to connect on any of those platforms.
Fantastic. I will definitely include all of your links in the description. Audience, thank you so much for watching. If you would be so kind, please like and subscribe and leave us some comments. If you ever want to interview with me, feel free to email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. Thank you again. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.